It started as a faint murmur in the back of my mind, a subtle feeling that something was off, like a shadow that didn't belong in the light of our marriage. My wife, Mia, and I had been together for 12 years. I always thought we were one of those couples that people envied. We had built a life that seemed perfect, a cozy home, a shared love for quiet nights in, and 2 kids who lit up our world. Yet, looking back now, I can see that perfection was an illusion, one I desperately wanted to believe in. Mia had been busier than usual lately. She was a marketing manager for a thriving firm, so late nights and business trips weren't out of the ordinary. But in recent months, her smile had started to feel forced, her laughter rare. She seemed lost in her phone, her gaze fixed on a screen that I was no longer a part of. I told myself it was just work stress or a passing phase. But the signs, those tiny, unmistakable cracks in our foundation, began to pile up. The first real clue came one Friday evening. She just returned from a business trip and was unusually quiet. I had made dinner, a tradition of ours to welcome her home. As I set the table, she sat on the couch scrolling through her phone, her lips pressed tightly together. When I asked about her trip, she was evasive. "It was fine," she said, not meeting my eyes. I didn't push. I didn't want to seem paranoid or insecure, but a small part of me itched with unease. That night, as she slept, her phone buzzed with a text. I wasn't one to pry, but curiosity and doubt compelled me to glance at the screen. The message preview read, "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was unforgettable." My stomach churned as I stared at the glowing words on Mia's phone. Last night was unforgettable. It felt like a blow to the chest, knocking the air out of me. My first instinct was denial. Surely, it was innocent. Maybe a colleague, maybe a miscommunication. I desperately wanted to believe there was an explanation, anything but the obvious. But the words wouldn't let me go. They etched themselves into my mind, replaying over and over as I sat there in the dark, the faint glow of the phone illuminating a reality I didn't want to face. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the phone. Should I open it? Should I dig deeper? Part of me knew that if I looked further, I might find something that couldn't be unseen. Another part of me whispered that I owed it to myself to know the truth. Before I could decide, Mia stirred in her sleep. The slight movement jolted me, and I quickly set the phone back down on her nightstand. My heart pounded as I slid back under the covers, feigning sleep when she turned over. Her soft breathing filled the silence of the room, but my mind was far from calm. The next morning, I couldn't bring myself to ask her about the message. The words lingered on the tip of my tongue, but the fear of hearing a lie, or worse, the truth, kept me silent. Mia went about her day as though nothing had happened, sipping her coffee and flipping through a magazine at the breakfast table. I watched her, trying to read her expressions, her movements, but everything seemed normal. Normal. That word burned me now because normal had become the mask she wore so effortlessly. Later that day, I decided I couldn't let it go. I needed to know more before confronting her. I told her I had errands to run and left the house, but instead of going to the store, I parked a few blocks away and began searching for answers. I pulled up our cell phone records, scanning through her call logs and texts. Her number showed frequent exchanges with a contact saved as EJ. I didn't recognize the name. The pit in my stomach grew as I noticed a pattern. Messages from EJ coincided with her late nights, her trips, and even the weekends when she claimed she was out shopping or meeting friends. The reality of what this could mean hit me like a tidal wave. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the screen. My hands trembled as I considered my next move. I didn't want to be the man who doubted his wife, who spied on her like some paranoid fool. But hadn't she made me this way? The woman I had trusted with my life, my heart, my family. She was hiding something, and I was going to find out what it was. That evening, Mia was in unusually high spirits, humming softly as she prepared dinner. She wore her favorite sundress, the one I'd always said made her look radiant. It felt like a cruel joke now. As I watched her move around the kitchen, the weight of my discovery gnawed at me. The more I tried to act normal, the more unnatural I felt. "Long day?" she asked, glancing at me with that warm smile I used to believe was meant just for me. "Yeah," I replied, forcing a smile of my own. Just errands and work stuff. She nodded, satisfied, and went back to chopping vegetables. It struck me how easily she could pretend, how effortlessly she could live in two worlds. I wondered how many times I had smiled at her like this, oblivious to the storm brewing just beneath the surface. After dinner, as Mia disappeared into the shower, I made my move. Her phone was charging on the kitchen counter, unguarded. My heart raced as I unlocked it using the passcode I'd seen her enter countless times. The message thread with EJ confirmed my worst fears. You looked stunning last night. I can't stop thinking about you. I'll make time next weekend. Anything for you. And then the photo. Mia, laughing with a glass of wine in her hand, sitting at what looked like a cozy restaurant table. The intimacy in her expression was undeniable. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just flirtation. It was something deeper, something I'd been blind to for months. As I scrolled further, I pieced together the story. EJ wasn't just anyone. He was her coworker. The one she'd mentioned in passing, casually weaving his name into conversations about work dinners and team meetings. The name I hadn't thought twice about. Now, it was the name that shattered my world. Before she finished her shower, I put the phone back and sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the wall. A part of me wanted to confront her immediately, to demand answers, to unleash the storm of emotions building inside me. But another part, the part that had been hurt, betrayed, and humiliated, wanted to wait, to plan. I needed to know the extent of her betrayal. Was this just an affair, or was it something more? Was she planning to leave me? Take the kids? Take everything? The next morning, I woke up before Mia and left the house early, telling her I had a work project to finish. In truth, I want to see a private investigator. It felt extreme, but I needed proof. Concrete evidence, not just the suspicions and fragments I'd pieced together. The investigator, a wiry man with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, listened as I recounted my story. If she's hiding something, he said, I'll find it. It was both comforting and horrifying to hear. That night, as I lay in bed beside Mia, I felt the chasm between us grow wider. Every time she reached for my hand or kissed my cheek, I couldn't help but wonder if she was thinking of him. I was no longer her husband. I was a stranger in her life, a man she had betrayed without a second thought. And yet, I still loved her. Or maybe I just loved the woman I thought she was. The private investigator, Mark, worked quickly. Within days, he sent me his first report, complete with photos, timestamps, and even video footage. Mia and EJ weren't careful. They didn't bother to hide their meetings, their lingering touches, or the way they gazed at each other when they thought no one was watching. The images turned my stomach. Mia leaning into EJ's car, laughing as he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The two of them walking into a boutique hotel arm in arm, and later, leaving with expressions that only confirmed what had happened inside. I stared at the evidence in silence, the weight of it pressing down on my chest like a stone. The proof was undeniable, and yet, part of me wished I hadn't seen it. Ignorance, as painful as it had been, was easier than the truth. Mark's report detailed their meetings over the past several weeks. Each rendezvous was meticulously documented, right down to the receipts from the restaurant where they'd had dinner the night I'd been home with the kids, eating frozen pizza and watching cartoons. It wasn't just the betrayal that stung. It was the thought of her planning these moments while smiling at me, lying to my face with such ease. I sat in my car outside Mark's office for a long time, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My thoughts swirled in a storm of anger, heartbreak, and confusion. What had I done wrong? How had I missed the signs? And then another thought crept in, a darker, more vengeful one. Mia wasn't just breaking my heart. She was shattering our family, destroying everything we'd built together. And she thought she'd get away with it. That night, I began to put my own plan into motion. Back home, Mia was already in bed when I arrived, her phone face down on the nightstand. I stared at her sleeping form, wondering how she could rest so easily while my mind churned with turmoil. I slipped into bed, careful not to wake her, but sleep wouldn't come. The next morning, I told her I had to go out of town for a work conference, a lie. Mia didn't seem suspicious, offering a quick kiss on the cheek and a distracted smile as she left for work. Instead of heading to an airport, I drove to a lawyer's office. If Mia was planning to dismantle our life, I needed to be prepared. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Rebecca, listened attentively as I explained the situation. She nodded as I handed her the file Mark had compiled. "This is strong evidence," she said, flipping through the photos and notes. "If you want to pursue divorce, this gives you leverage, especially if she tries to go after the house or custody of the kids." Custody. The word hit me like a punch. The thought of losing my children, even partially, was unbearable. "I don't want this to be messy," I said, though I knew it already was. "I just want to protect my family." Rebecca gave me a sympathetic look. "Unfortunately, it rarely ends cleanly. But with this evidence, we can ensure she doesn't take advantage of the situation." As I left her office, my mind raced with possibilities. The thought of confronting Mia now felt premature. I needed to see how far she was willing to go, how much of her life with me she was willing to destroy for EJ. If she thought she could walk away from this unscathed, she was wrong. The lawyer's words lingered in my mind as I drove home. Mia's betrayal was a wrecking ball swinging through the structure of my life, but I wasn't going to let it collapse without a fight. As much as it hurt to think of her as the enemy, her choices had left me no other option. That night, Mia was unusually affectionate. She greeted me with a kiss and asked about my work conference. The hypocrisy of her actions made my stomach churn. I played along, pretending everything was fine. Over dinner, she laughed and told stories about her day, her face lighting up in a way I hadn't seen in months. I realized, with a pang of bitterness, that her joy likely came from him. I forced a smile, nodding at the appropriate moments, while my mind churned with plans. After the kids were in bed, Mia retreated to the bathroom, and I seized the opportunity to check her phone. I wasn't surprised to find a new string of messages from EJ. "I can't wait for this weekend. I've made reservations at that place you love. Counting down the hours, gorgeous." "Me too. Let's make it unforgettable." Her response was accompanied by a selfie I didn't recognize, one she'd taken in the mirror while wearing the dress I'd bought her for our anniversary. I clenched my jaw so hard it ached, my vision blurring with rage. She had planned another weekend with him, and this time, I wasn't going to sit idly by. The following day, I called Mark. "Can you track them this weekend?" I asked. "Already on it," he replied. "I've got the reservation details and will follow their movements. I'll send you updates as they come in." Mark was worth every penny. On Saturday morning, Mia kissed me goodbye, a suitcase in hand, and told me she had a last-minute work retreat. I forced a smile and wished her a good trip, even as my heart shattered further. Once she was gone, I called my parents and asked if they could take the kids for the day. "Just need some time to think," I told them, my voice shaky. When they arrived, my mom gave me a long, knowing hug. "Take care of yourself," she said gently. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. With the house empty, I opened my laptop and waited for Mark's updates. Hours passed like molasses as I refreshed my email obsessively, each notification making my pulse race. Finally, the photos arrived. Mia and EJ at the restaurant, holding hands across the table. Mia leaning into him, her head resting on his shoulder. The two of them leaving the hotel together, their faces flushed with laughter. It was everything I needed, and more than I could bear. But I didn't break. Not yet. That evening, I began preparing the next step in my plan. Mia thought she could live two lives, that she could betray me without consequence. She didn't realize I wasn't the same man she'd been deceiving for months. By the time she returned on Sunday evening, I was ready. "Hey," she said breezily as she walked through the door, her suitcase rolling behind her. "How was your weekend?" "Quiet," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "The kids had a good time with my parents." She smiled, seemingly relieved. "I'm going to take a shower. Long drive." As she disappeared upstairs, I stared at her suitcase, wondering how she could carry on so easily. But it didn't matter. This time, I wasn't going to let her lies slide. I had everything I needed to confront her. And when the moment came, there would be no escaping the truth. The moment had finally come. Mia was upstairs, the sound of water running as she took her shower. I sat at the kitchen table, my heart pounding in my chest, the evidence spread before me like a battle plan. The photos, the messages, the reservation details. All of it painted a picture I couldn't ignore. When she came downstairs, dressed in a cozy robe with her hair wrapped in a towel, she smiled at me as if nothing were wrong. That smile, once the source of my joy, now felt like a blade twisting in my chest. "Mia," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. She froze, sensing the weight in my tone. "What's wrong?" I gestured to the chair across from me. "Sit down. We need to talk." Her smile faltered, replaced by a cautious expression. Slowly, she took a seat, her hands folding nervously in her lap. "Okay, what's this about?" I slid the stack of evidence toward her. "It's about this." She hesitated, her eyes darting to the photos and then back to me. Her lips parted, but no words came. "For months, I've ignored the signs," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and hurt. "The late nights, the business trips, the distance. I told myself it was all in my head. But it wasn't, was it?" "Miles, don't lie to me," I snapped, my voice rising. "I've seen the messages, the photos. I know about EJ." Her face drained of color, and for a moment, she looked like she might deny it. But then her shoulders slumped, and she looked away. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said quietly. I laughed bitterly. "You didn't want to hurt me? Do you think that makes it any better? You've been lying to me for months, Mia. You've betrayed our marriage, our family. How could you?" Tears welled in her eyes, but they didn't move me. "Not this time. It just happened," she whispered. "I didn't plan for any of this." "You didn't plan for it?" I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "So all the dinners, the weekends, the lies, those just happened too?" She looked down, her silence more damning than any confession. I stood, pacing the room as the emotions I'd been holding back surged to the surface. "Do you have any idea what you've done to me? To our kids? I trusted you, Mia. I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me." "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I know I messed up. I never wanted it to go this far." I stopped and turned to face her, my anger simmering just below the surface. "So what now? Do you think we can just pretend this didn't happen? That you can keep lying to me and expect me to smile through it?" "No," she said, shaking her head. I don't know what I expected. I'm sorry." "Sorry isn't enough," I said, my voice cold. "Not this time." That night, Mia slept in the guest room while I lay awake in our bed, staring at the ceiling. Her apology meant nothing. It couldn't erase the betrayal or undo the damage she'd done. But as the hours passed, one thought consumed me. Sorry wasn't enough, but it was a start. I wasn't going to let her walk away from this without consequences. Not after everything she had taken from me. The next morning, the house was unusually quiet. Mia stayed in the guest room, emerging only after the kids had gone to school. I sat at the dining table, nursing a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. My mind felt like a battlefield, torn between anger, sadness, and the faintest trace of hope that maybe, somehow, this mess could be salvaged. When Mia finally walked into the room, she looked like she hadn't slept. Her eyes were puffy, her face pale. She hesitated at the doorway, as if gauging whether I was ready to talk. "We need to figure out what happens next," I said without looking at her. She sat across from me, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her sweater. "I don't want to lose you," she said softly. I scoffed, setting the coffee mug down with more force than necessary. "You should have thought of that before you started seeing him." Her shoulders sagged, but she didn't argue. Instead, she took a deep breath and said, "I'll end it with EJ. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this, Miles. Please, just give me a chance." Her words should have brought relief, but they didn't. Instead, they felt hollow, like a desperate attempt to cling to the life she'd so carelessly jeopardized. "You'll end it," I repeated, my voice bitter. "Just like that? After everything, you think a clean break is all it takes?" She flinched at my tone but nodded. "I know it's not enough. I know I have to earn back your trust, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Her sincerity gave me pause. For a moment, I considered the possibility of working through this. But then I remembered the photos, the messages, the lies. The weight of her betrayal crushed any hope of reconciliation. "I don't think I can forgive you, Mia," I said finally, my voice low but steady. "Not after everything. You didn't just betray me. You betrayed our family." Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't reach out to comfort her. I couldn't. Over the next few days, we navigated a tense coexistence. Mia avoided me as much as possible, throwing herself into work and the kids' schedules. I could see her trying, cooking elaborate dinners, organizing family outings, even leaving little notes on the fridge with apologies scribbled on them. But it all felt too little, too late. Mark, the private investigator, had delivered his final report, and it was damning. Mia's affair hadn't been a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a calculated betrayal that had stretched on for months. And now, as I reviewed the evidence for the 100th time, I realized I couldn't let it end like this. Mia wanted to save face, to quietly sweep this under the rug and pretend it never happened. But I couldn't let her walk away unscathed. She had taken everything from me, my trust, my happiness, my sense of security. It was time for her to feel what it was like to lose. The first step was subtle. I began quietly gathering financial documents, securing passwords, and meeting with Rebecca, my lawyer, to finalize the groundwork for divorce proceedings. I didn't tell Mia. She'd find out soon enough. In the meantime, I played along, pretending to consider her attempts at reconciliation. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Mia had underestimated me. She thought I would crumble under the weight of her betrayal, that I would beg her to stay or let her dictate how this ended. But she was wronged. I moved like a ghost through my own life, quietly orchestrating the next phase of my plan while keeping up appearances. Mia thought my silence meant I was softening, that I might actually give her the second chance she was begging for. But she couldn't have been more wrong. Every day, I watched her closely, waiting for her to slip up again. She had promised to cut ties with EJ, but I didn't trust her word. And I was right not to. It was late one night when I caught her texting him again. She was sitting on the couch, her phone angled away from me, her thumbs flying across the screen. I pretended not to notice, flipping through a book while my stomach churned with rage. When she got up to make tea, she left her phone on the coffee table. I seized the moment, unlocking it quickly and scrolling through the messages. "I miss you. Just give me time. I'll figure everything out." My blood boiled as I read her words. She hadn't ended things with him. If anything, she was making plans to keep the affair alive. By the time she returned, I had already placed her phone back where she'd left it. My face betrayed none of the fury brewing inside me. "Everything okay?" she asked, glancing at me nervously. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Just tired." She seemed satisfied with the answer and settled back onto the couch. But inside, I was seething. The next day, I went to Rebecca's office with the new evidence. She raised an eyebrow as I handed her screenshots of Mia's recent messages. "Looks like she's digging her own grave," Rebecca said, flipping through the photos. "Is this enough?" I asked. She nodded. "More than enough. If this goes to court, she'll have no ground to stand on. You'll come out of this in a strong position, financially, emotionally, even with custody of the kids." Custody. The word hit me again, but this time, it didn't feel like a blow. It felt like a lifeline. The kids were my priority now. Mia could destroy me, but I wouldn't let her drag them down with her. Rebecca outlined the next steps, including filing for divorce and freezing joint accounts. I listened carefully, my resolve hardening with every word. Mia thought she held all the cards, but she didn't realize I'd been quietly stacking the deck against her. Back home, I began putting the rest of my plan into motion. I set up a separate bank account, transferred my savings, and began documenting everything: expenses, messages, photos. I wanted a paper trail that would leave no room for doubt. Mia continued her charade, acting like the perfect wife while secretly texting EJ. It was almost laughable how oblivious she was to the storm brewing just beneath the surface. But I wasn't laughing. I was waiting. And soon, she'd see just how far I was willing to go to make her pay. The days leading up to the confrontation felt like the calm before a storm. Mia continued to play her part, going through the motions of a dutiful wife and mother, but I could see the cracks in her facade. Every glance at her phone, Every vague excuse about where she'd been was another piece of evidence to me that she wasn't finished with EJ. I waited patiently, knowing that the moment to strike would come soon. And it did. It was a Friday evening when I noticed her packing a small overnight bag. She told me earlier in the week that she had a team-building retreat scheduled, but I hadn't believed her for a second. I played along, even helping her carry the bag to the car, all the while keeping my face neutral. "Drive safe," I said as she kissed me on the cheek and climbed into the driver's seat. "I'll be back Sunday afternoon," she said, flashing me a tight smile. I nodded and waved as she drove away, but the moment her car disappeared down the street, I sprang into action. Mark, the private investigator, was already on standby. I called him as I packed a bag of my own, letting him know Mia was on the move. He confirmed he was tracking her car and would send updates as soon as she reached her destination. I drove to a nearby motel, one where no one would recognize me, and set up a makeshift command center with my laptop and phone. Mark's updates began pouring in within the hour. Mia arrived at a hotel in the city. She's meeting EJ in the lobby. They're heading to the bar. Lots of smiles and touching. They've gone up to a room together. I stared at the photos Mark sent, my chest tightening with each one. There they were, my wife and her lover, smiling and carefree as if the destruction they were causing didn't matter. But it mattered to me. The next morning, I took the evidence Mark had gathered, photos, timestamps, even video footage, and forwarded it to Rebecca. She responded quickly, confirming that it was enough to finalize our case. Now it was time to confront Mia. I drove to the hotel, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. When I arrived, I asked the front desk for her room number, pretending to be a surprise visitor for her retreat. The clerk smiled and gave me the information, none the wiser. As I rode the elevator to her floor, my heart pounded in my chest. This was it, the moment everything would come to light. When I reached her door, I knocked firmly. There was a pause, followed by muffled voices. Then the door opened slightly, and Mia's face appeared. Her eyes widened in shock when she saw me. "Miles? What are you doing here?" I pushed the door open, stepping inside before she could stop me. EJ was there, sitting on the edge of the bed, his shirt half-buttoned. The sight of him, so casual and unbothered, sent a surge of anger through me. "I could ask you the same thing," I said, my voice cold. "Team-building retreat. Huh? This what you meant by building relationships?" Mia's face turned pale. She stammered, trying to find the words, but I didn't give her the chance. "I know everything," I said, throwing a folder of evidence onto the bed. The photos spilled out, each one a damning piece of proof. "You didn't even bother to cover your tracks." EJ stood, his expression shifting to one of discomfort. "Look, man, I don't want any trouble." "Sit down," I snapped, my voice firm. He obeyed, sinking back onto the bed like a scolded child. Mia tried to reach for my arm, but I pulled away. "Don't," I said, my voice breaking. "Don't you dare touch me." For the first time, I saw guilt in her eyes, real, unfiltered guilt. But it was too late. "You've destroyed everything," I said, my voice heavy with emotion. "Our marriage, our family, our trust. And for what? For him?" "Miles, I don't want your excuses," I said sharply. "You've made your choices, Mia. Now you'll deal with the consequences." I turned to leave, but not before glancing back at EJ. "Good luck," I said bitterly. "You're going to need it." As I walked out of the room, slamming the door behind me, I felt a strange mix of relief and devastation. The confrontation was over, but the battle was just beginning. The drive home from the confrontation was surreal. My mind replayed every detail, from Mia's shocked expression to EJ's pathetic attempts to speak. But most of all, I couldn't stop thinking about how easily she had chosen him over us. When I got home, I didn't cry or scream. I simply sat in silence, staring at the empty walls of a house that no longer felt like home. I realized then that this wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the end of who I had been. The next morning, I dropped the kids off at my parents' house and spent hours working with Rebecca, finalizing the divorce filings. By the time Mia returned from her retreat, the papers were waiting for her on the dining table. "What's this?" she asked, her voice trembling as she picked them up. "It's over," I said simply. Her eyes filled with tears as she skimmed the documents. Miles, please, we can work this out. No, I interrupted. We can't. You made sure of that. The days that followed were a blur of legal meetings, custody arrangements, and financial disentanglements. Mia fought to keep the house, claiming it was for the kids, but Rebecca and I had planned for that. With the evidence I provided, the judge saw through her act, awarding me full custody in the house. Mia was devastated, but she tried to mask it with bravado. You think you've won? She hissed during one of our court hearings. This isn't over. But her threats rang hollow. She had underestimated me, just as she had underestimated the consequences of her actions. E.J. didn't stick around for long. The moment Mia's affair became public knowledge, thanks to a strategic leak of certain photos, his career took a hit. His company, known for its strict morality clauses, fired him within weeks. Mia, too, found herself isolated. Friends who once admired her turned their backs, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. Even her own family, staunch believers in loyalty and marriage, expressed their disappointment. For the first time, Mia was truly alone. With the divorce finalized and custody secured, I began to rebuild my life. It wasn't easy. There were nights when the weight of it all felt unbearable, but I found strength in my children and the unwavering support of my family and friends. I threw myself into work, earning a promotion that allowed me to provide a stable, comfortable life for the kids. Slowly, the pieces of my shattered world began to come together. Mia, on the other hand, struggled to find her footing. The affair had cost her everything. Her marriage, her reputation, even her job. She reached out a few times, asking for forgiveness, but I couldn't give her what she was looking for. Some wounds run too deep. While I had no interest in actively seeking revenge, life had a way of delivering it for me. The evidence of Mia's affair had spread far and wide, making her name synonymous with betrayal. Her job prospects dried up, forcing her to take on a series of menial positions just to make ends meet. EJ, too, faced his own reckoning. The scandal followed him, tarnishing his reputation and leaving him ostracized in his professional circles. Knowing that they were both paying the price for their choices brought me a sense of closure. Years later, as I watched my kids play in the backyard of our new home, I felt a peace I hadn't known in a long time. The pain of Mia's betrayal was still there, but it had dulled, replaced by a sense of gratitude for the life I had rebuilt. I wasn't the same man I had been when this journey began. I was stronger, wiser, and more determined to protect what mattered most. As for Mia, I heard she had moved to a smaller town, trying to start over. I didn't feel anger toward her anymore, just a quiet sadness for what she had lost. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer defined me. I had survived the storm, and now it was time to embrace the calm.